Now we need to bring back to the stage our speakers from this morning, Tony Juniper, William Bird and Georgina Umney. If you could make your way up to here, because we're having a discussion now. I hope that's not a surprise to you. You look rather shocked by that notion, Georgina. And just while they're coming to the stage, I'd just like to pay tribute to, pay tribute to our speakers and the selection of our speakers. I do one or two conferences, and I've very rarely been to a sequence of 3 talks that we had this morning that were quite as impressive as that, whether it be about being at the heart of government like Tony, really expanding our minds like William Bird did, and coming up with a lot of solutions that Georgina did. It wasn't just kind of, oh, the young people want this. Georgina had a lot of ideas about how to do that. So I want to congratulate really the David and the Yorkshire Dales team who pulled this together, and whoever's pulled this together. I'd like a round of applause for them, because I thought they were really good speakers. Right, that's not enough of me being nice. It doesn't really fit with a character known as the Grim Heaper on Country File, so I've got to start living up to that now. We are going to throw this out to the floor. This is really your chance to put some questions, and there is a microphone or 2 roving around at the back. Just one. When it comes to the questions, if you could, you all like to say where you come from, so I'm sure I won't need to stop. Won't be able to stop you doing that. So if you think it's relevant, and then make it a question, please. Preferably directed to 1 rather than 3, because otherwise I'll decide for you who answers it. However, in the meantime, I'd just like to put a couple of questions myself, because I'm afraid that's just a sort of privilege I like. Tony, a straight question for you. Do you think it is desirable and likely that the national parks will get hold of some of the money that goes to the farmers, i.e. will we have control over some of their elms money?
I would have thought so. Are we using this one? Yes.
You may still have them on. I don't know if you
do. Oh, no, that went.
Okay, fine.
The Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is at the heart of the new policy idea of reallocating the agricultural money for public goods instead of farm payments, that's going to be, it's still work in progress. It's still being developed. It's going to be one of the biggest tools that we have going forward. And so in relation to the national parks, one would expect it to be a hugely important factor in how we're going to go on this journey, alongside the net gain piece and alongside potentially carbon offsetting, implementing the net zero policy. So all of these things are starting to take shape, and I think it's very exciting to see the opportunities that are coming with that.
So you expect the national parks to actually have some control over how that big pot of money is spent in their area? Because an individual national park,
I see. The control over it.
The money that goes to farmers is often 4 or 5 times greater than the money in the national parks.
This is work in progress. So historically, Natural England has been quite an important agency working with the farming community, advising them.
You give some of your money to the national parks. Come on, let's have it.
Well, so this is still being talked through in terms of who's got control of the budget. At the moment, the discussion is still going on in terms of how we can best get the money from the government to the farming community. And it's not only the farmers, actually, it's a land management scheme. So it could be people who are doing conservation as well as farming, who could be in receipt of that kind of money. What's going to be the most efficient way of moving the money from the centre to the action on the ground? And that is still being discussed in terms of who will advise, who will allocate the money, who will make sure it's being spent wisely. And that obviously is quite a lot of complexity there. What I would hope is that whatever we come up with, we'll be learning a lot of lessons from all the agri-environment schemes that we've been doing for the past 30 plus years, and all the things that we've learnt from those in terms of how to encourage farmers to want to join in, the extent to which we don't want to frustrate them with ticking of boxes rather than focusing on outcomes, the extent to which we don't want to tie them into bureaucratic knots and all that stuff that people do complain about. So the scheme design is ongoing. Natural England is helping government to put that together, and hopefully we'll finish up with something that's going to get a big bang for the bucks that are there.
Thank you. William, a question I'd like to put to you, I mean, it's an incredibly impressive and sort of convincing presentation, but I just sort of had a thought about the figures. Is there any evidence out there? If vitamin G, if getting exercise and getting it in green spaces is so great, what is the evidence that people in rural areas, or indeed farmers, who spend a lot of time outside are actually healthier than the rest of the population. And my understanding is it's pretty slim.
Yeah, I mean, they're not entirely, because you've got the 3 areas, the 3 Ps. So the rural isolation will actually trump the fact that you're in a beautiful place. So if you've got that isolation, and particularly if they have financial struggles and other things, they're going to create that stress and problems. And we see, obviously, suicide rates being slightly higher as well in the rural communities. So that's simply because you haven't got all those bits of a jigsaw together. So I think when we talk about, we can romanticize it, and you're right, it can be a little bit, this is all beautiful and lovely, etc.
It's a bit Edwardian sometimes, the redemptive power of nature, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And I think when you see pictures, and when they they show brain images of people, when a picture shows human habitations or human beings being in line with nature, that picture is far more reassuring to us than when we just see a place with no people or habitations at all. So some people get quite frightened with the natural environment. They actually find moors and conifers and things like that. That can have quite a kind of negative effect on people. So we've got to be a little bit careful. You're right. We can't always say this is the panacea for everything. It has to link all together.
That fear and access point is something I hope we might come on to later. But Georgina, a challenge I just wanted to put to you. You said very clearly that what we're seeing with young people and climate strikes shows how engaged they are. Actually, the proportion of young people involved in this is vanishingly small compared to the number of young people as a whole. Are you sure you're reaching a large cohort of young people and not just kind of preaching to the converted, the kind of people who are on the climate strikes already?
That's a good point. But I do think that is a really good network of people who are maybe more confident and who have had more opportunities in life that you can access, so that not everything has to come from you. So once you have, the people who are more active and who are more engaged already, they really want to continue to spread their message, and they want to reach other young people who aren't yet engaged, but they don't really know how or the correct way of going about it, or they haven't got the framework. Whereas what you could do is to bring those groups together, a bit like the Tomorrow's Natural Leaders program did, which was that our mission was to be trained to go and find other young people. And through that way, 21 people becomes 2,000 people, and using the young people that are available to you, then you can create a bigger network. But I admit, absolutely, that, yeah.
Just while folks are getting their hands in the air, thinking of who's going to ask the first question, just one quick one to Georgina. I mean, you talked about volunteers. I think is it not absolutely the case that if you ever go into a volunteering thing in most national parks or wildlife-related things, it's full of retired people, not young people? I mean, and that's fantastic that there are retired people, and I wouldn't for a moment want to reduce the number of retired people doing it. But it is true at the moment that this kind of volunteering seems to be for the old rather than the young. Yeah. How can we put that right?
By having voluntary days and sessions that are run by young people for young people, so that we can make sure they're fun. I mean, sometimes things felt a little bit uptight on volunteer days, but if we could have some music and somewhere to sit down and have a cup of tea and make it fun for people and relaxed, then that would help a lot.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got our first question. If I can just, yep, gentleman there, yep. If I can just encourage people to, when they've caught my eye, to keep their hand up so the person with the microphone can see who they are as well. Yes, sir.
Peter Allen, acting chair of the Lake District National Park, an 18th generation Lake District farmer. The one thing I was amazed today that was missed, apart from Georgina, was the word communities. We can talk about landscape, we can talk about land management. It probably was indicated a little bit in William's reference to isolation. But the real issue about a healthy national park is having communities that people want to live and work in, that mean you can grow a family up, send them to a local school without them travelling 50 miles. In our decisions about the way forward, we must please, panel members, address the issue of keeping good, healthy communities in the future.
Do you feel, sir, a little bit that some of the discussion here rather ignored the people in the parks?
I do very much. We talked about health, which is concerning people, youth, again, but that's just part of a big picture, which is having a living, working community that encourages the youth who are residents to stay.
I'm going to take that just as a statement. Very, very valid it was too. Yes, gentleman in the check shirt there.
Hi there, James Stewart, convener of Loughborough and Trossachs Park. Questions for Tony, really, which was picking up on where you started. There was an implication in the way you're answering the question that things would sort of be undone unto the parks and the national authorities in terms of here's how much you've got to work with, away you go. The question really is, what would it take for the collective parks to be at that very top table, engaging in the discussion about what we could offer, what we can do? Because I may be mistaken, and please correct me if I am, I can't see any operation or evidence of the national parks at that level in those discussions, in those rooms. So what do we need to do to be in that space, influencing those discussions and offering what we can offer?
Thank you. Tony?
Shall I go? So I don't know these days how you speak collectively in terms of having a national presence and an organisation that goes into the heart of the machine and speaks on your behalf and advocates for you. Obviously, the Countryside Commission years ago, Countryside Agency, it's there in terms of one residual bit of that at least went to Natural England, and so we're sometimes involved in some of those discussions and hopefully taking the right kinds of messages. But I think we're going to have a much closer dialogue between us and all of you in order to make that happen. And so in terms of the different institutions, agencies, structures you've got to talk to us, then that maybe will be a good place to start, is to get an integrated view amongst all of us. Now, the thing is, you see, which I think is very important beyond the mechanics of it, is the narrative that we're taking to the top table. So, and I think the spending review we just had a month ago, whenever it was, kind of confirms the idea that the environment is still seen as a pretty marginal, low priority issue. The idea of the national parks having some of the money from Elms, well, maybe, but basically what we need is a shift in the environment, in inverted commas, as an issue of public policy and the priority that's put behind it. It needs to be much higher up. We all know that. How are we going to do that? I think it comes down to the story that we're collectively offering to the country, which is, I think, compelling if we get it right, because by investing in the national parks, by investing in the national nature reserves, by investing in the recovery of the natural environment, we're going to get so much more back than we're putting in. And I think we can now show that. There's lots of data, there's lots of evidence, but it's not fully owned or kind of appreciated by the people who think, there is a choice between the health service, the police, the army, the education system, and the environment. Well, we'll put that on the list, but only a little bit. Not recognising that the environment is cross-cutting, it's contributing to society at so many different levels. So probably what we need to do is find a way of getting better organised in terms of how we collectively speak together, having an integrated view of what we can collectively offer, and then taking our message in a more compelling way with that narrative about public benefit behind it. I think that would be my broad approach.
And having a heavy hitter in DEFRA, which we had briefly.
Yes, the political context is always changing, and it kind of goes up and down. But I think we go with what's there, and we do the best we can with what's there, and we've got a couple of very environmentally committed ministers just joined DEFRA in the form of Zach Goldsmith and Rebecca Powell. The conversations I had with the new Secretary of State have been very positive about what she wants to do, keeping Mr. Gove's agenda going in the right direction. So I think actually the thing that has changed, which makes the politics less volatile than it used to be, is the extent to which now there is a cross-party consensus and a very strong level of public backing for the things that we know that we can do. Recovering nature, dealing with the climate change issue, and through both of those bringing big public benefit, including via public health. So that's a strong story, and I hope that it grows in the ownership of that in politics. It's there, though.
Thank you, Tony. Yes, lady on the same table, I think, just there. Was it you, madam? Or
my question was stolen, but as I've now got the microphone, I might make the opportunity to ask
well, you can hand it on to someone else if you want.
It was asking Tony, actually, and also William, I guess. Two things. One is, sorry, my name's Sarah Fowler, Peak District National Park Authority Chief Exec. I'd like to turn it on his head. You say you don't understand how we operate together. What is it you want? Because I've heard from the feedback that big sense of harnessing the power of the 15 and creating a movement, a desire here. What would help our partners nationally in terms of taking that into government? And my second question is about hard hitters, not just in DEFRA. We need a hard hitter in Department for Health. So, William, any advice?
Yeah, I was going to put that to William. How do you make sure this voice is really heard at the heart of the Department of Health?
I think the common kind of feeling, and I know Alison and Paul Hamlin have been working on that on the health side, is those common values, the values of what the parks represent. That's so important. So you've got the places. If I was a health person, I'd be saying, I'd go through my list. Are you reaching the right people? Because health inequalities is our biggest problem. So anything that divides health or widens health inequalities is going to be an immediately no-no. So if it's only, you can only bring in white middle-class people, that will be the end of the conversation. So are you reaching the right people? Are we changing their behaviour? Can we measure that change of behaviour? Can we sustain that change of behaviour? Can we replicate that model? And can we scale it up? Because scaling up is one of the biggest problems. Now, I don't think for 1 minute we should take away what we've achieved in the last 10, 15 years. I think a huge amount has been done when I look back 20 years ago. It's all been trial and error, lots of experimentation, which is all fantastic, and we're gradually getting a learning, which is kind of, perhaps, every now and then a report comes through. But we've now got to move to the next position, because now we're being ready to be listened to at a very senior level in the Department of Health. So you've got Simon Stevens really much pushing now for prevention. You've got their next 5-year plan, and we've got the social prescribing, where they're putting £1 billion of 1,200 link workers in every primary care network, which would be a 40,000. So in your CCG, you'll have primary care networks, you'll have these link workers, and these link workers are going to be, their job is to make sure that you can be on their agenda, and money will hopefully flow somewhere from the health into your area. It doesn't always happen. So there's a huge amount, but are we ready for it? Are you ready for it? That, I think, is the big thing, is what is the value that's going to reach those people? And we talked about it in the health. They're not hard to reach. We're just very bad at being the messenger. And I think that's where we've got to turn it around.
Can I just, David, you may know the answer to this. Is there a single, within the national parks, i.e. all 15 separate gangs, as I referred to you earlier, is there a nominal figurehead? Is there a, capo de tutti capi to go to the Godfather?
Well, devolution's created a situation in different countries. So at an England level, national parks, England speaks for the national park authorities. Scotland have got a much closer relationship with the government because they're part of government, and the Welsh have got a similar organisation. There's a more informal body that actually relates to the 15, but that's more sharing of good practice across the nation.
What I'm wondering is if the Secretary of State for Health or indeed Environment wants to hear from a person representing the national park. Well, firstly, would that help you two to have a single voice?
Well, so I'm speaking from a position of ignorance in terms of how this is organised. And so what Dave just said there about the difference in Scotland and England, that's news to me in terms of how this works. But I would very much welcome a conversation at a strategic level. Sorry?
That was the point exactly that I was going to make. There are 5 parks here who are working under different, completely different systems than the one that Tony has been
Exactly.
talking about. And
Yeah.
indeed, our health is also devolved.
Yes.
So, we're talking about environment and health are both
Okay,
devolved
so,
areas.
Yes.
But it would be really
So-
helpful if we could get the organisations such as Natural England,
Yes.
NRW, SNH, working really closely together to
Yep.
give the strong
So-
UK.
So do you think it would be useful to have a single national parks champion for the UK?
I think that we have got to work at every single level.
Yeah, but ministers don't like 10, 12 people coming to advise them.
The UK ministers actually don't have any influence,
Well,
I'm afraid.
would-
So there's
Scotland or Wales.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Then they
yeah,
don't.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. So, I'm Natural England. I do have ambitions to be working much more closely with Natural Resources Wales and Scottish Natural Heritage, not least because 2 of the really big things that the world needs to act on, climate change and biodiversity loss, we are locked into global regimes, global treaties as the UK. And so our delivery is as the UK. So we do need a level of that whereby we've got some connection between the global ambition and what we can deliver across the 4 countries of the United Kingdom. Having said that, I am Natural England, And so the things that I can decide and make operational on the ground through our area teams and partnerships and everything else, it is England. So I think probably we would want both. Now, just to say...
Very quickly, please.
The Glover Review is about to come out. It's
Yeah.
going to say some big stuff. I think we should have a meeting between Natural England and the national parks and just try and work out if there's something we can do together and how we approach taking forward those recommendations. And there will be a separate thing we need to do at UK level, which actually people are working on.
William, would it help in the Department of Health have a single voice representing this 10% of the countryside that says, Minister, this is what you could really do for health if you involve the national parks?
Yes, but not on their own. Even that 10, it's got to link in with, it's got to be a natural environment solution for health. And therefore, we've got to include the urban parks, we've got to have the... So what health would say, look, we've got this resource which doesn't necessarily just sit in the national parks, it sits everywhere under different guises. You've got reserves, you've got SSIs, you've got all these other things. So we've got to work out what's the model to get the natural environment to help in health. And therefore, there's got to be a common way of everyone brought together from the 4 countries to actually make sure we've got the evidence right and we've got some practicalities. And I think that will really help.
Yes, sir?
Thank you very much. Gareth, Brecon Beacons National Park. Carrying on from that, I think for me, how I look at it, and I wish to hear from the panel because it does go across it, monitoring, because all this comes down to pound and pence. So what we're talking about is prevention in health, prevention, bringing people into the parks to make their quality of life better, but it needs investment in there. There's no way of actually monitoring how you can improve someone's life if they don't come into the health system. So I'd just like to hear from the panel their views of, as we move forward, how are we actually going to monitor this? Because government wants results to their outcomes, and actually we can't physically show these outcomes in a style that is accepted at the moment.
This is one of what's measurable becomes important, I guess, is that fact. William, is there a way of measuring the impact of this stuff that would communicate to government?
Yeah, there's surrogate measures you can use. So you can, you've got the sporting in England, not sure what happens in Scotland, you've got the physical activity measures, and you've got MENI as well. So you've got some surrogate measures there. In the social prescribing, there's now an evaluation framework is, can you, even though we don't know perhaps how many people went into the park or how much they did, are more people not seeing a GP? Are more people not going to A&E? Are we actually getting less prescribing? So they're starting to look at the endpoints. So when you do it at scale, you can start to see changes in those endpoints. But I do plead with everyone is data has to be there. We have to be better at collecting that data, because in the end, the public health people are going to say, where's your data showing that you've got those more deprived communities on board? If you haven't got the data, there won't be any money coming through. So data and working alongside some academics perhaps to help on that is going to be critical for the future.
Georgina, can I just ask you on this? Do we know at all, or do you know, or do others know, how we're doing on the access of younger people to national parks? Do we have data on this?
Not that I know of. No, I don't know. I mean, the room might be able to tell me if you're recording.
No.
There is.
Well, it's a valid point then, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we could do with knowing a little bit more about
Absolutely. That. I mean, Our Bright Futures has been obviously keeping close tabs on how many young people they've engaged through the project and how that has spread its tentacles, the different hours of work that different young people are doing. But on the whole, no, I don't think there is for national parks. And actually that's a big problem as well, because I mean, the discussion we were just having here, I noticed there was quite a lot of generalisation about young people, which is invariably bound to happen. I mean, essentially, we're obviously the same as you, we're just people that have different varying degrees of experience. And some of us, lots of us, go into nature or want to go into nature. So it isn't fair to make these overall sweeping assumptions and saying we're not interested or we're not going. Just because we don't go even doesn't mean we don't want to.
I just wanted to pick up on something you mentioned kind of in passing, which I thought was potentially really important. You mentioned this business about work away and, not volunteering actually, is it? So this is the ability to basically, most younger people tend to do it abroad, don't they? That you go abroad and you work somewhere and you get given accommodation. I think there's a real opportunity there because it feels somehow more empowered than volunteering. I think there's a huge chance. And my own kids have done it overseas and had a great time. I think there's an enormous chance there in the UK.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it teaches young people so much, or anyone who wants to go. And same with woofing, which is working on organic farms, because they're all really tested.
Could be working on any
farms
farm, in
and-
my view.
Well, organic's great,
Yeah, well,
ideally, but
has
yeah.
its place.
And yeah, I don't know why, in a way, I mean, parks haven't sort of pulled on that more, or wildlife trust sites, or national trust, because there is accommodation available, or there are sites that could quite affordably be turned into accommodation. And there are already people living on sites at a lot of these places, and it might seem like a lot of extra work perhaps to take that on, but it's really going to be worth it, for someone, considering the cohort of new people you'd have coming in, not only from this country but from abroad as well.
Yeah, that's very good. Yes, gentleman at the back there.
Robin Milton, Exmoor. Question really for Tony, I think, actually. Interested to hear the last questioner say it comes down to money, realistically, what we can leverage into the parks. And Tony, your public money for public goods remit that is around delivery of future schemes and so on, I was quite interested to know here that you didn't note the word natural capital anywhere within your speech this morning. Do you think the concepts that are out there, including that natural capital concept, will enable leverage of enough public money for public goods to deliver what we need to in the national parks to both protect and enhance what we have?
So I think that the natural capital framing for this is very important for government, in the sense of us being able to land that narrative I talked about earlier, whereby we can show that investing in the natural environment is bringing bigger returns than not investing in it. So that's important, I think, just in terms of how we make the case for public money to be coming behind what we know we need to do. But that's not the only source of finance that can come into the space, and getting investment from others who can help augment the public money is going to be really quite important going forward. There's a couple of things already that we can see that are beginning to take us in that direction. So one source of revenue is coming via water companies. I mentioned United Utilities earlier on, who are helping in the Ennerdale rewilding project, and they've got a business case there from the point of view of the water quality. And there are other examples around the country. I was actually at a water treatment works in Essex on Friday, where basically wetlands have been created in partnership with the Norfolk Rivers Trust in order to improve the discharge quality of the water coming out of the treatment works in a way that's much cheaper than building a load of concrete and steel and chemical intensive infrastructure. So you can see already that there are opportunities to pull in private money alongside the public money. So can you imagine the benefit you'd get if we had water companies investing in the same landscape as the government, and at the same time you might have, for example, an airline investing in that same landscape in order to catch the carbon that could be kept in the blanket bog. And so I think these are some of the opportunities that lie in the near future, whereby we can harness that idea of nature being the provider of benefits and starting to put some financial values on those benefits that's going to help us. It's quite complicated. I'm hoping that at Natural England we can help play a role in bringing people together to build some of these partnerships. And actually, that's our new mission statement, is around partnership.
Thank you. We've probably got time for just a couple or so more questions. Yes, sir?
Okay, thanks, Tom. Just a question for Georgina. I just wondered if what you heard in the debate earlier gives you confidence that we as national parks are capable of delivering the solutions that you suggested in your presentation.
It did and it didn't, because you clearly already, I mean, some of the parks are doing a huge amount of work and it's really great, but there isn't really much communication between you all, it seems, which I was quite surprised by. I thought it was more of a sort of overall body where, some parks are saying, oh, well, how can we possibly find any young people? I don't know where they are, out in the woods, somewhere, out in the urban places, and underground. And other sites have set up, free bus schemes and youth forums, and they've already got, a large number of young people on their teams. And I think really you need to actually get together all together. You have the solutions already, but amongst some of you, there's this idea that it's not possible, or that young people aren't interested, or that you don't know where to find them, whereas others of you are saying, well, yeah, of course it is, and we've already done it. And so it'd be really, really good to have a representative from each or a couple of representatives from each area, as well as a youth member, to come together after this and actually sit down and continue this work and say, okay, well, what are we actually going to do individually? And you could even just begin by seeing what you have done and sweeping that out across every site that it's possible to do it on, because it's always possible. You know, you can find the money for one thing, you can find the money for another thing, and on the whole, these solutions are not very expensive either. They're just about teamwork and about being more open.
Georgina, do you think there's an issue with perhaps not fear of the countryside amongst some younger groups, but a sort of lack of confidence, and that therefore that sort of stops them feeling it's theirs, and whether it's, you know, the feeling they're going to be told to get off my land, or whether it's the fact that there's no digital phone signal to navigate. Do you think that that kind of lack of, you know, say, confidence, self-confidence in the space is a big deal here?
Yeah, I do actually, and I was actually really surprised by it from going onto the course. I mean, for instance, I met a young woman who was too frightened to walk down the track to the beach, which was, you know, less than 100 yards, because she didn't know. She'd grown up being trapped indoors and she didn't know what might happen to her. And I think that's why it's so important that it's integrated from schools. I mean, this is obviously going to be a very, like a patchwork of different ways of addressing this problem. You know, the school thing is potentially a bit slower, but it's going to have greater effects in the long run, whereas there are things you can do more urgently, much quicker. Things like fear and a lack of confidence, that can only be brought to people through the people who are teaching them and mentoring them. And if that's not coming from your parents, then that has to come from someone else who's in a position of guardianship over you.
Thank you very much indeed. One more here. Yes, gentleman in the light jacket back there.
Thanks very much. It's Paul Hamlin from National Parks England. I just wanted to pick up on some of the comments which have been made earlier, a sort of theme which has been coming through about collaboration between the different parks, because clearly, as David explained, we are in a sort of post-devolution world, and that's put some sort of stresses into the system, because we have three different nations with different political priorities taking place. And so in terms of advocacy, that is undertaken through National Parks England, for Westminster, with the two Scottish parks working together, and National Parks Wales advocating to the Welsh Assembly. In terms of how the parks work together, many of the themes that we've been talking about do cross boundaries, and that's well understood. So there are a whole series, and what's very evident to me from today's discussion is that there are a whole series of groups that come together, professional groups, officers within the national parks, who are dealing with these issues, sharing experiences, sharing their challenges too. Perhaps that work is not as visible as it might be to others, but I just wanted to sort of share that so that people were sort of knew that there was actually quite a lot of collaboration that's been going on, even if that's not too visible, and that's something that we can take away. And I think, you know, just parting shots, say, you know, I hope that we can continue to work with Tony on post-Glover, on Elms, and a whole range of other priorities, with William in terms of engaging with public health community, Department of Health, social care, and with Georgina too on that really important agenda.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take that as a statement. Really, so you are in a sense the one who speaks at least for the national parks of England, although not for the whole UK. And I think we've certainly heard in the earlier part of this discussion that the perhaps getting a greater unified voice for the national parks could be a very useful thing, and also including some of the other natural pressure groups. That's just about it from me. I've kind of given my sum up already of what I think a tremendous meeting this has been, so thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much to this panel, who I think deserve another round of applause. And now I'm going to hand over to Carl Liss, who is chairman of the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority. Carl.